What's up, everyone? It's your host, Carlos Ponce here, and this is episode 4 of season 2 of Advancio, a live video interview podcast. And now, today, we got Fernando Labastida with us today, and he'll be telling us a little bit about him in a minute. And if you are just discovering us, well, welcome. If you've been here since the beginning, since 2022, well, you know what we are about. Now, here's a quick rundown. Advancio Talks is where we sit down with people actually building the future of technology, not just talking about it, doing it. For example, CTOs, founders, the folks making decisions that matter, etc. Now, Fernando has been in content marketing for 27 years. And think about that. He was creating content strategies when most of us were still figuring out email, right? Now he's helping Gen X and Boomer founders navigate AI without losing their minds. So we're going to talk about how he connected Silicon Valley with Latin America before it was trendy and what he learned from sharing stages with industry legends and why his approach to AI-powered marketing actually works. So, whether you're drinking coffee, commuting, or just curious about what's actually happening in tech, stick around, and Fernando has got stories and insights you won't hear anywhere else. So let's jump in. Fernando, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
And I can't believe we're in the second season already.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's our pleasure as well, Fernando. Thank you for joining us on such a short notice. You were kind. So I really appreciate that part. So, Fernando, let's start with, before we jump into the subject matter of the day, which is a bunch of cool stuff we have prepared for today. Tell us a little bit about you, your background, your story, anything you want to share with the audience right now to begin with.
Yeah. So I would say the interesting thing about me is that I am a person without a real home, if you will. I say that in jest, but I was born in New York City to a Mexican father who went to live in New York from Mexico. A mother from Dallas, Texas. I lived in New York, Mexico City, London, Long Beach, California, and back in New York again. And now I'm here in Austin, Texas. And I just love being an international citizen, really interacting with entrepreneurs in the United States and Latin America, from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, in this whole content marketing space, helping founders of technology startups, whether they have some kind of back-end IT operational application to custom software development companies. I love working with all kinds of tech entrepreneurs.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for shedding a little bit of light into your background. Now, let's move on to your journey. So let's go back to the beginning, right? So take us back to the dotcom boom.
Yeah.
It wasn't like pioneering content strategies before content marketing was even a thing,
Well, I want to take you even before the dot-com boom, actually, because that's where my discovery of the principles behind content marketing really started. So before I was actually in technology, I was in the ocean shipping and freight forwarding business in LA, in Long Beach, California. Long Beach is the second largest port in the world, next to LA, which is the first largest port. And I was interested in starting my own import-export company. So I actually tried to devour as much information as I could. And I remember going to a free exporting seminar being put forward it was organized by a bank. I think it was Security Bank or whatever in Long Beach, California. Really, really useful seminar. And I went up to the guy after the seminar and I asked him, why are you giving this seminar for free? He says, well, the bank does this because we think it'll attract exporters and importers who will eventually ask for a letter of credit to
Mhm.
pay for their export and import things. And I thought that is really, I mean, that intrigued me.
Mhm.
That was very interesting. They were giving a free training, because they wanted to attract clients. It was a soft pitch. It was like
Yeah. Mhm.
giving value before asking you for the business. And I've seen that kind of, once you see that, you can't unsee it, right? And I
Right.
saw that pattern at Home Depot. Home Depot always has a list of classes on, in the board outside of the Home Depot. It says, next Wednesday, 3-hour class on how to build your own deck, etc. So, companies are educating people. Okay, so going to the .com boom, I got started in the .com boom in 1996, actually working for a telemarketing company. Our clients were Microsoft, 3Com, Cisco, and a bunch of startup software companies. And we actually had to make phone calls on their behalf
Mhm.
to the Fortune 5,000, IT directors, IT leaders, etc. Right? So that was just pure hardcore cold calling. But I was interested again. I've always been very entrepreneurial. I wanted to start a business. I was inspired by the telemarketing company, but I wanted to take software companies into Latin America. I thought, well, look, I was in Austin, Texas. I said, Austin has a lot of cool software startups. They should enter the Mexican market, the Argentinian, Chilean market. And so a friend of mine and I, Gerardo Dada, we decided to pay for our own tickets to go to Miami and attend Comdex Miami because we figured that Comdex Miami is focused on the Latin American markets,
Mhm.
and we would pitch them. But what we decided to do, and back then this was before Mailchimp, it was before Aweber, before all these email automation tools that we're familiar with today. But there were these email relay services that you could use as a newsletter tool, right? And so we figured out how to use that. And when we went to Comdex Miami, we went from booth to booth. It was all U.S. companies wanting to export to Latin America, and they figured that Comdex Miami was the place to meet Latin American buyers, right?
Mhm.
And so we went there and I said, look, we're starting a newsletter about how to enter the Latin American market. Would you like to join our newsletter? And pretty much I would say about 9 out of 10 of the people in the booth said, sure, put me on the list. And we would manually write down their
Mhm.
email addresses, right? And then when we got back to Austin, we entered them in our thing in our email relay system, and we started writing articles about how to enter the Latin American market because our philosophy or our mindset was if we provide them with valuable information about how to enter the Latin American market, then they'll eventually contact us, or we can actually we can gain their trust, set us
Mhm.
up as authority, so that we can then pitch them on our services. Um, Long story short, we really didn't get a lot of traction because at that time that was just when the European Union had just formed and everybody was all hot and heavy to enter the European Union and nobody was thinking about Latin America. But that turned into a discussion group. So we transitioned from a newsletter to discussion group,
Mhm.
and it became it went. We started with the name Latin IT Marketing, and then it became Latinos in Technology. And all of a sudden, we realized that there were people in San Francisco, there were people in New York City, there were people in Chicago who had established these little chapters of Latinos in Technology. And so we started this. It became a discussion group where people. It was like an early form of a social network, right? Where people could write to the email address, and everybody would get the email address, and people would respond, etc. But again, it was content, right?
Mhm.
Content time, user generated content. And I remember I started my first meetup. It wasn't even called meetups back then because the whole meetup term was started in 2002, 2003 when I forget who was the Democratic candidate who started all these meetups. But we had our first meetup. I had moved to New York City at the time to work for a .com startup, and I remember organizing a meetup with the people that I had recruited on my email list who were all interested in Latinos in tech. So that was my first experience with content, right? Then
Mhm.
fast forward to 2009, I was working as a sales rep for an enterprise software company that did data integration, ETL, etc. And I started a blog while I was working at the company. I started a blog that talked about the benefits of data integration. And at the time, what was very new was the whole SOAP issue, service oriented SOA, service oriented architecture, and all that stuff. So I started writing about that. I'm not a technology guy, but I understand enough to talk about
Mhm.
it and talk about the benefits of it.
Yeah.
And the company supported me in my blog, and they assigned an SEO resource to me. They used a little bit of gray hat tactics to get traffic, Google traffic to my blog, but still. And that was a way that I started generating some leads for my actual sales practice, because I was in sales at the time. Right. This is again now post dotcom boom. But I learned a big lesson in the value of content marketing. Then I get laid off because that was the middle of the Great Recession.
Hmm.
And in 2009, I started another blog. Again, I called it Latin IT Marketing, but instead of helping U.S. companies get into Latin America, this time I was focusing on companies like Advancio and other companies who wanted to enter the U.S. market. And I started blogging in Spanish. And that's when I discovered content marketing, the actual term content marketing. I discovered Joe Pulizzi and the Content Marketing Institute, and it kind of gave an organizing structure to what I already kind of inherently knew inside of me, but I
Hmm.
didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know I didn't have a framework or a model. But when I found Joe Pulizzi, I actually interviewed him for my initial blog. And when I got my first clients, I had a couple of new clients, one from Argentina and one from Mexico, that I was helping them to enter the U.S. market. I used content, right? So my first client, I actually wrote a white paper for him.
Hmm.
He provided technical support services from his call center in Juarez,
Hmm.
Chihuahua. And then the Argentinian company, they actually had I don't know if you remember Lander app. Um,
Really? Honestly, not really, but
okay, Lander app was an Argentinian company. They had a landing page software, and what I did was I essentially started their blog from scratch, and I
mhm.
just did all the blogging with focused on the keywords around digital marketing and landing pages and calls to action and etc. And it got to a point where they started ranking on the first page of Google for certain
Mhm.
keywords, and then they were able to sell their company to a private equity firm, thanks to what I helped them to do with content marketing, with basically organic search through the
Right.
content that I was creating. Right. So
Mhm.
um, yeah. So I think I've kind of given you a background that was a little bit more than what you were asking for.
No, that's perfectly fine. I mean,
Yeah.
you're sharing everything with the audience, and I think it's pretty enlightening. So, of course, there's a million questions that I would like to ask you, but we only have so much time. So, that leads me to the actual your passage through Silicon Valley, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
the what I call the Silicon Valley and the Latin American bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So you were bridging Silicon Valley and Latin America before AI. So what
Yeah.
opportunities did you see that others missed?
Okay. Well, and this is what and this is an opportunity that I still see people miss. It's just like I saw that people were missing this opportunity back then, and I'm still seeing them miss this opportunity. And what I saw was that um, there was this whole cadre, this whole group of Latin American outsourcing companies who were
Hmm.
arising to provide nearshore outsourcing and compete against, the Indian outsourcers and the Filipino, Pakistani, Ukrainian, Russian outsourcers, right? Because because of the same time zone advantages, cultural advantages, the proximity advantages, especially with Mexico and Latin America. Okay, that was great. But the thing that they were missing is, first of all, differentiation, and second of all, branding, right? Because you know their approach to the U.S. market was colored by their experience in their own countries in Latin
Hmm.
America, right? Where you're probably familiar with the term todólogos, right? In Latin
Hmm.
America, you could be a todólogo. You can say, oh, I do Java programming and I also do .NET, and we can build you a back end application and a front end. So because there really
Hmm.
wasn't enough business to be a specialist. In the United States market, you have to be a specialist. You have to
Mhm.
focus on a niche market, and you have to focus on differentiating yourself. And that's one of those areas of opportunity that I saw that so many of these companies were missing, right? And I was kind of preaching that message. And there was a few people that got it and decided to live through that. And I'm actually right now a member of a WhatsApp group of it's called TechMix. It's Mexican technology entrepreneurs and engineers living in Austin,
Mhm.
Texas. And there was a recent discussion of a guy who actually wanted to come to us in the United States and open the market. And the responses he got were very similar to what I just told you. It seems like as though the message is finally getting across about differentiation and specialization and carving out a niche, etc. So that was one. And number two is the whole branding thing. And in reality, the way to brand yourself these days is not through mass advertising on TV
Yeah.
like Colgate and Cheerios did back in the day, but it's through content. It's through setting yourself up as a thought leader. And I think that one of the missing elements was the mindset that had the patience for that to work out. Because they said,
Mhm.
look, we need business now, we need opportunities now, we need leads now. Sure, but what about 9 months from now, a year from now? Are you going to always be in an emergency situation, always scrambling to get the next deal? Or do you want your reputation to precede you? Do you want to build authority on Google? Do you
Mhm.
want to build? Do you want to have an audience? Do you want to have subscribers? Right? And I think that's the important thing about having a content marketing approach that includes an email newsletter is you
Mhm.
can get people to be a subscriber, right? So that way, when somebody visits your website, only 2% of the people that visit your website are actually in market right now, right? Are actually available to buy your service right now. What about the
Mhm.
98% of the people that are not in market but could be in market a year from now, 2 years from now, maybe 6 months down the road? You need to have a way to nurture them, to let them know how you think, to give them valuable content so they feel so you can execute the reciprocity mindset that Robert Cialdini talks about. He talks about that in the book Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. Um, one of the six attributes of persuasion is reciprocity. The more
Mhm.
you give, the more people feel indebted to you, the more they see you as an authority, and the more they like you and they know you. And so that's one of the things that content marketing to do. And so
Mhm.
that's what I saw as the missing opportunity back when I
Right.
got started. And I still think it's a missing opportunity, especially with these, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young engineers that have just graduated from El Tec de Monterrey or El Politécnico de Mexico, and they want to, and they're very smart, and they start a technology company, and they want to enter the U.S. market, but they think, okay, I'm a brilliant engineer, I don't need marketing, I'll just sell my knowledge, and
Yeah.
it's not the way it works in the United
Yeah,
States market.
that's not the way it works, right? So I
Okay.
guess that you could probably place what you just mentioned into what I would call loosely a cultural nuance between the mindset in the U.S. and Latin America. So
Yes.
which leads me to asking you the next question is about that, which is, well, when you were doing this, bridging these two regions, Latin America, the U.S., Silicon Valley. So, what cultural nuances, by the way, in marketing or in other areas, did you discover when working across these regions that could have been kind of getting in the way of, you know, leading to successful endeavors?
Okay, so there's two cultural nuances. One is one that got in the way, and one is one that I think is a big advantage of Latin American tech entrepreneurs. So the one that got in the way is, I think, what I told you about before, the lack of belief in marketing. The belief that, well, marketing is an expense instead of an investment, right? In the United States, it's the opposite. People see marketing as an investment, and in creating branding. And when you have a brand based on the content that you create, and people know you, you become famous to your total addressable market. That means closing deals are a lot easier, prospecting is a lot easier, everything is a lot easier because people already know who you are
Hmm.
because of your content. So if you don't believe in that, if you think it's a waste of time because all you want to do is hire some guy who has a portfolio of clients and they're just going to introduce you to a deal, that's wishful thinking at best. Okay, so that's a drawback, but I think there's a thing that Latin American entrepreneurs and founders of tech companies in Latin America have an advantage of, and that is that they're very innovative, right? And so I've worked with entrepreneurs from Mexico and Argentina, and I think that if we look only to the Silicon Valley or Austin, where I am right now, if we only look to those areas for sources of innovation, then we're
Hmm.
missing the boat. We are missing the boat. I
Right.
think that there are some brilliant uh, creative thinkers, people who think out of the box in Mexico City, Guadalajara, in Buenos Aires, in
Hmm.
Mendoza, Argentina, in Santiago, and Bogota, Medellin. All these places. There are brilliant engineers, people who are very creative. Sorry, got a tickle throat, right? People
That's all
who
right. I got
people
my
who
coffee here too.
yeah,
So
exactly. Well, I got my coffee as well, so but people who are very innovative. And I think that I was listening to a client of mine who's from Argentina, and he's decided to do what I was preaching, which is to specialize in a niche market and to differentiate themselves. They've decided to become outsourcers in the robotics industry support area. Nobody competes with them. Okay. So number one, that's what they're doing right. They've decided to focus on robotics, whereas everybody else is focusing on developing apps for companies, right? So, you know, they've got a head start on everybody else who wants to provide support for the robotics industry. But number two, I was hearing him talk about the future and about what's coming down the pike, and he was looking at me with, and he's a porteño, he's from
mhm.
Buenos Aires, and so like they're very self confident and all that kind of stuff. And he was looking at me with and I was thinking, oh my God, this is exactly the same feeling I get when I've talked to the entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley or Silicon Hills. Silicon Hills is Austin. Startups here in the United States. When I've talked to these, visionary founders, you get that in Latin America too. We just need to find a better way of exposing their ideas, culturally translating their ideas to the U.S. market and really giving them credence. So I think that's one thing that that they have a huge advantage of. They have that personality of pitching ideas. They have the personality of wanting to communicate ideas, as opposed. I don't want to mention any other cultures particularly, but there are some other cultures that are, they just prefer to be more, heads down, not make too much of a noise, don't make a scandal. They don't want to put attention on themselves. And I think, Latin Americans have an advantage in that area.
Absolutely, yeah, totally
Yeah.
hear you. Yeah. Okay, well, Fernando, we're coming up on time, and we only got time for a couple more questions. And I would like to ask you next. How, let's talk about the Latino markets and the content, right? How,
Yes.
how would you say how should brands approach Latino markets differently in the AI era?
Okay. So are you talking about brands selling to the Latino market in Latin America
In
or
general, yes,
in
yes,
general?
yes.
Okay. So in the AI era, so let me answer that question within the context of how I'm actually using AI today,
Okay, yes.
because I think that's there's right now we're in one of the most important periods of business. It's like I saw a chart the other day that talked about how where we are right now in the growth of AI is exactly where we were with Netflix around 1990, not Netflix, Netscape around 1994, 1995. Still very early stages. So there is no set methodology. There is no set strategy. Everybody's trying to invent things. Everybody's trying to figure out how things are going to work, right? So I think that's the beauty of things. But this is my hypothesis, and I'm proving this by the actions I'm taking with my clients, um, is that AI is not going to replace people. It's
Hmm.
going to expand people. In fact, one of the guys I interviewed for my podcast, his name is Amos Bar Joseph. He's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Swan. So it's GetSwan.ai. They're an agentic AI go-to-market platform,
Hmm.
and he talks about how AI can 100x you, right? So it's
Hmm.
like you and you have 100x little U's all over the place, right? So, and I think, and that's exactly my philosophy as well. So AI can then take your personality, your voice, your point of view, your opinions, your tone of voice, and it could just expand it, right? It can expand it, right? It's just like, I don't know if you've heard of the author James Patterson. He's a author
Hmm.
of novels. He's written more than 200 books, but he hasn't actually written the books. He's the author of the books because it's his ideas and his stories, but he hires ghostwriters to write those books for you. Some people say that's cheating. Some people say that he's a fake writer. That's not true. He is actually the author of the book. And you see that with business leaders and politicians. They are the authors of their books, but they're not the writers. AI is the ghostwriter for you, the business
Hmm.
person, as the author. Okay, so now let's take this concept now to brands wanting to market to the Latin American market. I think that what people want is authentic voices.
Right.
That's why I champion founder-led marketing, right? Founder-led marketing is when the founder himself or herself, you know, speaks into the camera, or maybe in between meetings or when they're out for a run, they'll speak into their phone, and then they'll take that, or somebody takes that, takes the transcript, runs it through some custom GPTs or Claude projects, and turns that into a cascade of content that they can cascade across social media, their blog, newsletters, YouTube, etc. So if you have somebody who is very attuned to the idiosyncrasies, to the local vernacular of different Latin American markets, and they take that authentic voice, because people like to be spoken to in a
Hmm.
language that they're familiar with, right? So if I talk to you as a friend, and we're in some street in Mexico City, and we use idioms that are only used in Mexico as opposed to Santiago, Chile, or as opposed to Cucuta, Colombia, you know we will understand each other, but people from other parts of Latin America or Spain won't understand us. So if you have somebody who can relate to that person, speaking to them like that, and then we can use AI to replicate that with your own voice, right,
Hmm.
and from your own point of view, that I see as the marketing of the future, and it's happening right now, right? So I don't know if you want me to if you want me to give you an example of something that I could pull out of thin air to answer your question, I could probably do that.
Yeah, please do. I mean, we only got a couple more minutes, but please do, and we'd
Yeah,
love to hear it.
yeah. So let's just say that that I want to sell software. I want to sell software for I don't know, software for doing food ordering in Uruapan, Mexico, or something, right? You have DD, or you have Rappi or whatever, you know. But suppose I want to come in and be a competitor, right? The way I would do that is I would probably hire a local person, and I'm a company based in Austin, Texas, but I would hire a local person in Mexico, maybe a youngster, maybe somebody in the 26, 27 years old, and just record them being authentic, maybe taking a ride on a motorcycle, talking about how easy it is to order, etc., and then take that person, do little slices of videos and share that on LinkedIn and TikTok, etc., and then using AI to then write little memes, and share them on Instagram, share them on Facebook, etc. It's really just humans marketing to other humans, but using AI to 100x that person's voice for better reach.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
yeah,
definitely great, Fernando. Well, unfortunately, they say that time flies when you're having fun.
yeah.
So we're about to wrap up, and I have an announcement to make. But before we go there, any final words of wisdom for our audience that you might want to leave us with?
Yeah, I just think that if you're a founder of a company, I think you really need to start just sharing what you're doing, sharing your origin story, even sharing the results of a client call you just had. If you just had a call, then
Hmm.
you could share that, because people want to see the behind the scenes. Even if you're a technology founder of some boring company that optimizes your cloud operations, you can be like that restaurant owner who brings somebody in to film you cooking the food. People want to see how you cook the food. People want to see how you run your company. People want to see how you started the company. Just start sharing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, Fernando, it's been a great pleasure to have you here today. Really, I sincerely look forward to continuing our conversations in the near future. And but before
absolutely.
we go, yeah, before we go, I have a quick announcement to make, and this is about next week. So, what's going to happen next week here on Advancio Talks? First of all, we're going to have Mr. Victor Arias. He's the chairman of LBAN, or the Latino Business Action Network. We're going to be chatting with him about Latino business leaders driving innovation and entrepreneurial growth. And that's going to happen on July 9th at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So, guys, if you're watching now live or in the future, the recordings of the conversation, make a note of it, mark your calendars, and join us next week here, right here on Advancio Talks, July 9th, 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, for another great episode of Advancio Talks. That being said, Fernando, thank you so much for having been with us on the show.
Yeah, it was a
And
lot of fun.
we will see you next time. Please, Fernando, stick around. We're going to be doing a quick off the air wrap up. And the rest of you guys, folks, see you next time.